August 6, 1945. The morning sun had just climbed above the haze over Hiroshima. In a quiet research building in Tokyo, a group of Japan's top physicists studied intercepted American radio signals, unaware that within moments their world, and everything they understood about physics, was about to collapse. At precisely 8:15 a.m., their instruments began to flicker. Needles swung wildly across gauges measuring atmospheric radiation. The chief scientist, Dr. Kenji Tanaka, frowned. He had seen similar readings only in laboratory fission experiments, but never like this. Something catastrophic had occurred, far beyond any conventional weapon known to man. Moments later, the first reports arrived. Hiroshima had vanished beneath a single flash of light. For years, Japan's brightest minds had believed America was far from mastering nuclear fission. Their own research, crippled by lack of resources and constant bombing, had advanced slowly. They knew of uranium enrichment, of theoretical chain reactions, but none imagined the Americans had turned theory into a weapon. As news filtered in, silence filled the lab. A junior researcher whispered, "It can't be the atom. It's impossible." But deep down they all knew. The shock wave had not just flattened a city, it had shattered their faith in science as they understood it. By midday, military couriers confirmed what no one wanted to hear. An American aircraft, a single B-29, had destroyed Hiroshima with one bomb. The name was whispered among the scientists like a curse. Little boy. They gathered in the underground laboratory, replaying every fragment of intelligence they had dismissed. Odd shipments from Oak Ridge, the mysterious Manhattan Project, the sudden silence of American uranium exports. It all fit now. America hadn't just built a bomb, it had harnessed the elemental fire that once existed only in the hearts of stars. Dr. Tanaka stared at a map of Hiroshima pinned to the wall. The city had been a dot of strategic importance, but now it was a wound carved into the earth. Reports spoke of shadows burned into concrete, of people vanishing into light. For scientists, it was both awe and horror, a technological miracle fused with unimaginable destruction. They had spent years chasing theories, and now those same equations had been turned into an instrument of annihilation. One of the senior physicists, his voice trembling, said, "We have reached the end of science. The rest is death." Outside, Japan's war machine still pressed on, but inside that dimly lit laboratory, the war had already been lost. The scientists realized that whatever power America had unleashed was beyond imagination, beyond anything human civilization had ever conceived. In that moment, they understood something profound and terrifying. The age of conventional warfare was over. The atom had changed everything. And Japan, despite all its courage and intelligence, had been left studying blueprints for a world that no longer existed. In the days that followed Hiroshima, Japan's scientific community descended into a quiet panic. Laboratories across Tokyo, Kyoto, and Nagasaki buzzed with frightened energy. Military officers stormed into physics departments demanding answers, shoving crumpled reconnaissance photos of a city reduced to dust across the tables. The scientists examined them in silence. Roads turned to glass, steel melted like wax, entire neighborhoods erased in the blink of an eye. To the untrained eye, it looked like an act of God. To the scientists, it was worse. It was human intelligence pushed to its absolute breaking point. Dr. Kenji Tanaka and his colleagues were ordered to calculate the possible yield of the weapon. They did the math in disbelief. 15,000 tons of TNT from a single device. The numbers mocked everything they thought they knew about physics. As the hours passed, the scientists tried to reconstruct how America could have achieved such a breakthrough. Some remembered faint rumors from 1943, whispers of secret reactors in the deserts of New Mexico, uranium shipments disappearing from Europe, and strange geological surveys near American airfields. Tanaka drew a rough timeline on the blackboard, chalk dust hanging in the air like smoke. "They must have split the atom," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Not in theory. In practice." A young assistant dropped his pen. The thought that the Americans had mastered nuclear fission while Japan still debated its feasibility felt unreal. humiliating and terrifying all at once. In government circles, disbelief turned into desperation. Officials demanded that the scientists replicate the weapon, but they knew it was hopeless. Japan had no industrial capacity left, no access to the rare isotopes needed for such a device, and no time. Air raids had reduced much of their research to rubble. The war effort had drained every resource, every ounce of manpower. Now all that remained were exhausted scientists, staring at chalkboards filled with equations that suddenly felt like epitaphs. One of them, Dr. Sato, whispered, "They've weaponized the sun." No one argued. The room stayed silent except for the scratching of pens as they tried to understand the impossible. When a courier arrived with the report that America might strike again, a wave of dread passed through the laboratory. The scientists turned to one another, speechless. Tanaka closed his notebook and looked at the flickering bulb overhead. "If they have more of these," he said, "then Japan is finished." No one disagreed. That night, Tokyo's sky glowed faintly red from distant fires, and the scientists sat awake, staring at the horizon. The air itself seemed heavier, charged with a new kind of fear, not of soldiers or bullets, but of knowledge, unleashed and uncontrollable. In that sleepless night, Dr. Tanaka wrote in his journal, "We chased the secrets of nature, but America captured them first. The atom no longer belongs to scientists, it belongs to war." He set down his pen and listened to the faint hum of air raid sirens in the distance, wondering if, by morning, another city would vanish into light. The days following Hiroshima became a relentless march of calculation, speculation, and dread for Japan's scientists. Each morning, Dr. Kenji Tanaka arrived at the laboratory with the same question gnawing at him. How had the Americans transformed raw uranium into an instrument capable of annihilating an entire city? He reviewed intercepted communications, photographs, and fragments of reports that had somehow survived Allied air raids. Every piece of information confirmed a terrifying truth. American nuclear power was not just a weapon, it was a revolution in human capability. The equations on his blackboard no longer represented theory. They represented fate itself. Each variable, each calculation, reminded him that Japan had been outmatched not by men, but by knowledge. The lab was tense. Every scientist worked feverishly, tracing the chain reactions, the isotope separations, the unimaginable logistics behind the Manhattan Project. Some whispered that America's success was sheer luck, but the evidence contradicted hope. Even the smallest misstep in those calculations could produce disaster on a massive scale. Tanaka examined them with trembling hands, his mind racing to understand what they had lost in the war of science. He could see the pride of his nation's previous research slipping through his fingers like sand. They had chased nuclear theory, but the Americans had trapped it in a bomb, weaponized it, and unleashed it with terrifying precision. The concept of a city-scale explosion had leaped from theoretical journals into reality. For the first time, the scientists felt the full weight of knowledge as both wonder and curse. Outside the laboratory, the war raged on, but the scientists' minds were elsewhere. Rumors of a second bomb reached them, and with it, a deepening sense of inevitability. They imagined the mushroom cloud rising over Nagasaki, the searing heat, the radiation spreading like a silent predator. Meetings with military officers grew frantic, with generals demanding timelines, yields, and formulas that could replicate American success. The scientists knew it was impossible. They lacked materials, infrastructure, and time. Every attempt to calculate a feasible Japanese nuclear bomb ended in the same cold conclusion. They could not match the Americans. The realization hit harder with every passing hour. Japan's brightest minds had been rendered powerless, their ingenuity dwarfed by the relentless advance of their enemy's science. At night, Tanaka walked through the quiet streets of Tokyo, the distant glow of fires reflecting off broken windows. He thought of Hiroshima, of the lives extinguished in a single flash, of the shadows burned into stone. Science, which had always promised understanding and mastery over nature, now felt like a weapon of judgment. In whispered conversations, his colleagues admitted what they could not say aloud. The atomic bomb had changed the very rules of warfare. Humanity's capacity for destruction had surpassed comprehension. The fear in their eyes was not just for the soldiers or civilians, it was for civilization itself. They had glimpsed a power beyond imagination, and it had left them shivering in awe and terror. By the end of the week, Japan's scientific community convened in hushed gatherings, examining every fragment of intelligence, debating every equation, every possible scenario. They were haunted not by what they had done, but by what they had failed to do, by what they could never achieve. Dr. Tanaka stared at the map of Japan, plotting cities, populations, and theoretical yields. In his heart, he knew the conclusion before it was spoken. The era of conventional warfare had ended. The atom had rewritten history, and there was nothing left they could do to prevent its unstoppable force. For the first time, they understood the terrifying truth. American nuclear power was not merely a weapon. It was an irrevocable turning point in human history. By August 9, 1945, the shadow of annihilation had settled across Japan. Nagasaki had been destroyed, and the scale of devastation left little room for denial. Dr. Kenji Tanaka and his colleagues moved through the ruins of intelligence and data, piecing together every detail they could about the Americans' nuclear achievement. Each fragment of information was more horrifying than the last. The speed of uranium enrichment, the efficiency of the implosion mechanism, the precision with which the bomb had been delivered. They had spent years theorizing chain reactions, but the Americans had accomplished what seemed impossible, turning theoretical energy into a weapon of unmatched power. The scientists stared at their notes in stunned silence, the realization settling over them like a leaden weight. Japan had underestimated what science could accomplish in human hands, and the cost of that misjudgment was clear in every shattered city, every shadow burned into concrete, every life extinguished in an instant. Military officials demanded assessments, desperate to understand whether there was any way to respond, to counteract, to somehow regain the upper hand. Tanaka and his colleagues provided calculations, formulas, and warnings, but every scenario they produced confirmed a brutal truth. Replication was beyond their reach. There was no material, no infrastructure, no time left. The war had drained their nation of the very resources that might have allowed them to match America's power. The scientists knew that no countermeasure could save the cities, the civilians, or even the nation. The realization that their knowledge, skill, and ingenuity were insufficient pressed on them like a physical force. They had studied the atom for decades, yet the Americans had outpaced them in every conceivable way. The scale of that accomplishment was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. In private discussions, the scientists reflected on the broader implications. Nuclear power was no longer a mere scientific curiosity. It had become a force that could end entire civilizations. Tanaka thought of the potential for global destruction, the moral weight of unleashing such power, and the uncharted era that humanity had entered. For Japan, the immediate concern was survival, but for the scientists, the shadow extended further. They had glimpsed the dawn of a world in which knowledge equaled annihilation, and that knowledge had been wielded with decisive and terrifying mastery by their enemy. They understood with chilling clarity that the atomic bomb had irrevocably changed the rules of war and the trajectory of human civilization. As the days passed, surrender became inevitable. Japan's leaders, guided by the unbearable evidence of destruction, prepared to accept terms they had long resisted. In laboratories and offices, the scientists documented every insight, every calculation, every lesson that could be salvaged from catastrophe. They spoke quietly of what might have been, what could have been done, and what they had failed to foresee. Tanaka closed his journal one evening, staring at the skyline over Tokyo. Smoke from distant fires blurred the horizon, and the city seemed suspended between past and future, destruction and the faint glimmer of hope. They had lived through the first demonstration of nuclear power, and the memory would haunt them, guiding their work and their conscience for decades to come. They had realized finally and irrevocably that American nuclear power was beyond imagination, and the world would never be the same.